And just ahead here on the Eyewitness News Update, Governor Perpich proposes a new budget that calls for your income tax and property tax to go down.
Fire forces more than 40 St. Paul residents out of their homes and into the cold this morning.
The wrecking ball goes to work on the old Metropolitan Stadium, paving the way for a $500 million development.
And tonight we start our special assignment series on daycare centers and how they're becoming substitute parents. In fact, those stories and more are next on the update.
You know, you've all heard that Lasso delivers a better yield. Well, we're confident enough in Lasso to put our money where our mouth is. If you're using dual herbicide now, compare it to Lasso in your own side-by-side fields. See for yourself. Lasso delivers extra yield, or we pay the difference in cash. Ask your dealer or call this number toll-free for details about the yield guarantee. Only from Lasso, the yield protector.
Break free and feel how splendid you are with Vanderbilt, the rich romantic fragrance by Gloria Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt, let it release the splendor of you. Vanderbilt.
Tonight, we will print and deliver roughly 375,000 copies of A Bigger, Better Star and Tribune. Tonight, a whole day of hard work hits the street. Tomorrow morning, when you open your copy, you'll have a view of your world that's bigger. And tomorrow morning, when we open ours, we'll be looking for ways to keep getting better.
Now, from Minnesota's leading news station, Cindy Brucato, Stan Turner, Dennis Felkin, and Bob Bruce. This is the Eyewitness News Update.
Good evening, everyone. The big number tonight is 12%. That's how much Governor Perpich wants to increase state spending and decrease income taxes.
Well, those were two of the most significant proposals the governor made today as he outlined his budget for the upcoming biennium, two-year period. We have two reports on what it will mean to you from government specialist Lindsay Strand and money specialist Greg Stone.
The governor's budget totals $11.4 billion. Nearly half of the money in his budget would be spent on education, and that is also where the big spending increases are proposed. Perpich is recommending a 19% increase in education spending over the next 2 years. The spending increases in all other areas would be only 7%. Less than the expected rate of inflation. As his staff briefed reporters, they pointed out this budget proposes the lowest rate of growth of any budget in the last 20 years. They described it as lean, but not mean. In a break with tradition, the governor had nothing to say about his budget message today. In fact, Perpich spent the day here at the mansion, resting. He returned from a trip to Europe late last night. Senate DFL leader Roger Moe suggested the governor did not want to be present to deliver the bad news about any budget cuts. He believes the governor's plan does not put enough money into property tax relief, and Moe is cool to other proposals.
When you got a budget message that recommends the same amount for the zoo and for the arts high school as for the rural crisis, I think that that is, to me, demonstrates an absolute lack of understanding of what the problem is in the rural areas of the state.
In baseball parlance, I'd say he's gone 0 for 3. He's spending too much money, he's setting too much aside in reserve, and he's not providing nearly enough in the way of tax relief.
The Perpich staff says that kind of criticism means the budget is a good compromise, one that makes both sides uncomfortable. They believe that means it is a budget that should eventually win approval. Lindsay Strand, Channel 5 Eyewitness News.
This is Greg Stone. The governor's new budget is pushing for jobs rather than welfare. In effect, his proposed program would be a take-it-or-leave-it proposition for many employable people on public assistance. Either they would have to accept jobs or training that were provided for them, or their benefits would be terminated. No work or no training, and no check. This is based on a feeling that those on public assistance who are employable
are, at this hour, minus 29, minus 33, minus 26. These aren't lows. These are actual temperatures occurring right now. And this is the kind of Arctic air which is spilling in across the upper Midwest. And the leading edge is just on our doorstep. It looks like it'll come through the Twin Cities sometime after midnight tonight and replace the relatively balmy air which is just out ahead of it. Our KSTP weather observers confirmed the kind of readings we thought we'd have today, generally in the mid-20s, and Bill Bauman out in Delano had 31 degrees. Not bad for late January. And low temperatures last night were rising into the teens, but before they did that, they were generally in the single digits or lower teens, although Molly Brown and Osceola had 1 below before the clouds came in and warmed that place up. And speaking of below zero temperatures, look at the lows last night. Look at this pocket of minus 20s, and there's even a few minus 30s hanging just to the north of that. And again, that's the kind of air which is moving in pretty rapidly across the upper Midwest. Well, as I said, the leading edge is just to the west of us right now. And as we thought, there's not a whole lot of snow with this system as far as amounts coming onto the ground, but it is a big general area of snow falling from Colorado on up towards Wisconsin and up in northern Minnesota. And as we saw a few moments ago, it left its mark on us. KSTP's color radar is searching around Minnesota and Wisconsin, and right now we're not seeing anything significant falling from the sky, but there are a few snowflakes and light snow falling in the region, and don't be surprised if we have another dusting tonight, but certainly nothing appreciable. Most of the significant snow is in different directions, particularly to our south. That's right, the National Radar Map has snow, and some of it heavy, falling in Missouri, and that's going to be spreading into Illinois. It's snowing right now along the shores of Lake Michigan, but that should slide right under us. If you're planning on traveling, particularly to the west, I'd advise against it because travelers advisories are out in western Minnesota and the Dakotas, and that's for blowing snow, knocking visibilities down to readings where you just can't see. Simple as that. In the Twin Cities, we don't have advisories out. We do have 20 degrees. Humidity's 56%. Winds are light right now, and boy, are they going to pick up. In the almanac, the high today was 22. That's above average. So is the low, and the airports had about a ½ inch of snow. Now, the weather map for tomorrow shows the leading edge of that Arctic air well to our southeast, and that should carry most, if not all, of the snow with it. Cold high pressure is going to be building in behind it. And look at these afternoon readings, near zero here in the Twin Cities, but it won't feel that. It's going to feel bitterly cold. The KSTP forecast for tonight calls for occasional light snow or flurries, windy and turning colder after midnight with some blowing and drifting possible, lows of 5 to 10 above. And for tomorrow, partly cloudy, windy, much colder, still some blowing and drifting, temperatures falling below zero by the afternoon. The wind chills will be 30 to 50 below because of that strong northwest wind. Tomorrow night and Thursday, partly cloudy, bitter cold, lows of 12 below to 22 below. Highs Thursday, only 4 to 10 below. And
really?
We don't see any appreciable warm-up before Sunday.
Okay, we will check with you later on that. Thanks, Dennis. In sports tonight, some new developments on the Mitch Lee situation and a look at the Gopher football recruiting program. Bob Bruce has those details and more. Their homes today when fire tore through their St. Paul apartment building. Authorities think the fire in the old apartment complex began in the basement. It was first noticed about 8:30. The building was equipped with smoke alarms, but according to the residents, not all of those smoke alarms went off. All 42 residents had to be evacuated. Some of them lost nearly everything they owned. Authorities say the building, meanwhile, was destroyed. Fire also destroyed a house in Minnetonka this morning. There's no word what started this blaze, but some eyewitnesses say it took crews too long to arrive on the scene. Now, Minnetonka fire officials disagree. They say crews were there within minutes of the call, which came when the house was already engulfed in flames. No one was inside the home at the time. Damage estimated at a substantial $100,000. Still coming up on this edition of The Update, the State Health Department tells residents of Waite Park not to use tap water, and we'll tell you why.
All right, and we will tell you about a ban that is being blamed on the weather. So stay with us for these and other stories next on The Update.
The shape of things to come has come. The Audi 5000S, sedan, wagon, turbo.
For a test drive, see your nearest Twin City Audi dealer today.
Who responds to your business communication needs at AT&T? At Norstan, I do. We tailor our Roam computerized telephones to your exact specifications. And we support your Roam system with over a decade of design, installation, and service experience. So try calling the president of AT&T. Then call me. See who responds first.
Norstand Communication Systems for revolutionary results from evolutionary equipment.
In our Eyewitness News Digest tonight, a citrus ban in Florida, a bus plunges into a river near Tokyo, and our first story in the Digest concerns missing children.
The city of Chicago has initiated a new way of trying to find those children. Their pictures will appear on advertising space inside Chicago buses and trains. 4 pictures will appear each month with the hope that someone will recognize a missing child and report to authorities.
In Japan today, a bus full of college students on a ski trip plunged into an icy river near Tokyo, killing 25 people and injuring 8. The driver apparently lost control on a sharp curve just before a bridge.
In Los Angeles, the attorney for Kathy Evelyn Smith indicated he may not let his client plead guilty to manslaughter charges in the death of John Belushi. Attorney Howard Weitzman said that after reviewing transcripts, he thinks Smith should not have been originally charged with homicide, should not serve time in prison, and, quote, was a victim of a tragic set of circumstances.
Well, not exactly a tragedy, but certainly big trouble in the Florida citrus groves, where today the Citrus Commission banned the sale of produce for 1 week following last week's freezing weather. This is the 4th such economic dilemma in Florida in 5 years, and 100,000 people will be out of work for as long as the embargo lasts. Indeed, big trouble down there.
Yeah, very cold. It's gotten a little bit warmer down there.
Yeah, and you know, it's funny, overall down there, they'll probably average out with a warmer than normal winter.
Really?
It's funny what you can do with averages. I'll give you an example here. You take a glass of ice and pour that in here. You take hot water, pour that in here. You mix it all up, and that comes out to be normal water. No problem at all. You can make statistics say anything you want. Now look at the departure from normal for our temperatures for the month of January. Now we've had our ups, we've had our downs, we've had our ups, lots of ups, and one real big down in the middle of the month. And you put all of that smorgasbord together, and so far we are only 1/3 of a degree above normal for the month. So that's just about as close as you're going to get with only 3 days to go. But I feel very confident that things are going to get much colder over the next couple of days. In January, we'll probably average out much below normal, probably a good couple of degrees the way things are shaping up. In fact, the cold wave we're going in is going to be very reminiscent of the one we just got out of about 7 or 8 days ago. The reason for the change is showing up in the upper winds. By Thursday, there's a big area of low pressure that's supposed to sit in the northern plains, and the whole country's circulation is going to be controlled right around it. The worst of the cold air is going to be just out to the west, but we are definitely going to be in its grip, no question about it. How much below normal? The entire west will be at least 10 degrees below normal, but Minnesota westward will be 20 degrees below normal, and much of Montana and the western Dakotas, 30 degrees below normal. Here it comes again. At 10 o'clock, the temperature out at the airport is 10 above with the humidity of 58%. The southeast wind is making it feel like it's 5 below and it's under cloudy skies. In the almanac, the low this morning was 4 below. That's well below average. The high today was 13. That's below average, too. And high temperatures today across the rest of the country show much of the northern U.S. still in the grips of another one of those Arctic air masses, with the coldest air sitting over the midwestern part of the U.S. But look at the southeast. They're recovering a little bit. Highs were in the 60s and the 70s. But that cold air mass is slipping out a little bit more to the east and allowing some warmth to begin moving on up from the south. In fact, our temperature will probably rise through the night into the teens. But the leading edge of the sharply colder air is poised and ready up in Canada, and these two air masses are already beginning to clash. And the first inklings that things were changing was when that high deck of cirrus clouds moved over us about 3 o'clock this afternoon. Well, the clouds have lowered now. The latest satellite photograph across the upper Midwest shows thickening clouds across Minnesota and Wisconsin, and they get even thicker as we go farther and farther back into the Rockies, where the makings of a winter storm is going. Now, we don't have any major snow taking place right now in Minnesota, but KSTP's color radar is around the state, and here's a band of light snow. A couple of bands beginning to form from near the southwest metropolitan area down to Windham, and they're moving towards the Twin Cities. So be prepared for some snow on the windshield when you go to work tomorrow. Speaking of tomorrow, the weather map for tomorrow shows cloudy skies with the leading edge of the sharply colder air moving into Minnesota. Light snow definitely falling. In fact, it could be a little heavier than light snow, with 1 to 2 inches possible during the day tomorrow. And on Wednesday, the temperature will take a very sharp drop, and wind chills by Wednesday afternoon could be very much in the very dangerous range. So keep abreast of this weather situation. The forecast for tonight in the Twin Cities calls for cloudy skies with light snow continuing to develop. The temperatures will slowly rise tonight with a southwest wind. For tomorrow, snow's likely, 1 to 2 inches possible, highs of 17 to 22 with a south wind. And tomorrow night and Wednesday, periods of snow, additional accumulations likely, and it'll get colder. Lows of 2 to 8 above tomorrow night. Wednesday's high only 8 to 12. And look at this, out on a limb. Clearing on Thursday, partly cloudy Friday and Saturday. But temperatures will be near zero for highs, and lows will be in the minus teens and the minus 20s. Very reminiscent of the one we just left about 8 days ago.
You know, according to your little demonstration there, then after we get this weather, we better get some 50-degree weather to average it all out.
Otherwise,
right?
that's going to be a solid piece of ice in there.
When we return, if you missed it, a look at who won what in tonight's American Music Awards.
Exciting. Also ahead, this week's special assignment, a look at what millions of children are calling their second family. Stay tuned.
At the heart of this race-winning Mazda RX-7 is a race-modified version of the same fuel-injected rotary engine that powers our latest Mazda RX-7, the GSL SE. 0 to 50 in 5.6 seconds. Alloy wheels with Pirelli radials, plus 25 luxury features like air conditioning, AM/FM stereo, and sunroof, all standard. Come test drive our finest Mazda RX-7 value ever. See your Mazda dealer in Minnetonka, White Bear, St. Paul, Richfield, and Brooklyn Center.
This year, we challenge you to compare corn insecticides. Compare and you'll pick the one that stands the test of performance and price. Thimet. Thimet controls corn rootworms, guaranteed. Thimet controls wireworms, white grubs, and seed corn maggots, guaranteed. Plus, Thimet saves you $2 to $4 per acre over other leading brands. So if you really compare soil insecticides on both performance and price, you'll pick Thimet. It stands the test.
Well, state officials are warning people in Waite Park not to use tap water from the city's municipal wells. That city, of course, located right near St. Cloud. The health department has found unacceptable levels of 6 possible cancer-causing chemicals in 2 city wells. However, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency is going to allow Superfund money to be used to provide drinking water to the residents in that city, as we say, near St. Cloud. Every morning, millions of children get dressed, hugged, and sent off to daycare.
You know, this is really amazing. Nationwide, 7 million kids spend their days in licensed daycare centers or daycare homes, and maybe twice that are with relatives or in unlicensed daycare. Well, tonight, Catherine Smith begins a special assignment series on this situation that we call the substitute parent.
Patrick Picard is 4 months old. Next week, his mother will be going back to work. Beth and Ed Picard have been looking for daycare for the past month. It's something they put off until the last minute. Choosing a daycare facility is one of the most crucial decisions a parent can make. Looking for the right place takes time, and as Beth and Ed are finding, it can be a very frustrating experience as well.
I'm sorry, but I cannot watch your child. I just started watching Another Infant on Monday, and I had no way of calling you to let you know. Thank you.
Here we go again.
The Picards have learned that finding good daycare is a complicated process. Like many parents, they feel guilty about the decision they face. Beth says it will be hard to go back to work.
I thought maybe I'd be happy to have a break during the day, but I'm not looking forward to it. But we have to do it, so we're going to try and get the best that we can.
I feel like we're losing a lot by giving them up. I'd sooner have her stay home. I would like to have her stay home. But at this point, it's just not feasible.
Tom and Joelle Chatfield have already found a daycare provider for their 4-month-old daughter, Stephanie. They look at daycare as a positive experience. Some members of their family felt Stephanie would be spending too much time with a substitute parent. But after looking at several facilities, Tom and Joelle decided home daycare would be the best.
We've chosen where she'll be at daycare. In that sense, we've got a lot of input on what she's to be exposed to during the day. I don't have any reservations.
The number of children in daycare has grown right along with the number of women in the workforce. 35 years ago, only 11% of mothers with young children were working. And by 1982, that number had quadrupled. Women were finding they could have it all, a career and a family. Today, 7 million children are in licensed daycare, but there's still a lot we don't know about its effects on very young children. More and more experts say daycare doesn't give children the emotional stability they receive from their parents. But even so, some researchers say we don't have to fear daycare.
There is not a lot of reason to predict that somehow 25 years from now, we're going to notice a difference among the adults in our culture, and it's going to be due to daycare.
The demand for daycare has exploded in the past 10 years, and it will continue to do so. But what are your choices? And how do you know what kind of care is best for your child? Tomorrow night, we'll explore the options. Catherine Smith, Channel 5 Eyewitness News.
All right, to help answer some of your questions, how about this? We've put together a small brochure. It is a step-by-step list of where to go and what to ask, and you can receive this pamphlet free by sending a self-addressed stamped envelope to Daycare, KSTP-TV, 3415 University Avenue, St. Paul. Our zip code here is 55114. Stan?
All right, Cindy, I bet you saw tonight a royal performance turned in by Minnesota's own Prince tonight at the American Music Awards. The show is seen right here on Channel 5. Prince won awards for favorite black single, When Doves Cry, and his album Purple Rain won 2 awards, the best black album and the best pop album. When he picked up his 3rd of the evening, he had a long list of those he wanted to thank.
I just want to thank, first of all, God and all of the American public, my band, Wendy, Lisa, Matt, Mark, and Bobby, and all the staff at Warner Brothers, Dick Clark, and all of you here tonight.
Shortly afterwards, in an energetic performance, Prince performed his hit Purple Rain. Our congratulations to the star from Minneapolis, indeed. Still to come here, a reunion between a brother and sister who haven't seen each other in more than 40 years.
Also coming up, another demolition project, this one at Met Stadium, and an upset tonight in college basketball. Bob Bruce will have those stories. We'll return with that in Eyewitness Sports.
Some folks call them the snowmobiles, those 4x4s from Ford. Right at home in the Northland snow, those 4x4s from Ford. Pickups, Rangers, Broncos too, those 4x4s from Ford. Best-selling trucks in the Northland, those 4x4s from Ford. See your hometown Northland Ford dealer today and drive yourself a bargain on a 4x4 from Ford.
We're a small town, homegrown, made the way you make your own pizza. Tombstone, we're a ladle down and loaded up with lots of mozzarella on the pizza. Tombstone,
we pile on the goodness, we're loaded with real cheese.
We're sure the taste of Tombstone's gonna please your families. We're a small town, homegrown, made the way you make your own pizza. Tombstone, made the way you make your very own. Tombstone.
Oh, how things can turn around, huh? Crazy.
This is unbelievable. You know, not long ago, Stan, Georgetown, their basketball team seemed absolutely unbeatable. Now the Hoyas have lost both the #1 ranking and 2 games in a row. St. John's beat them on Saturday and took over the top spot in the weekly poll. Then tonight, Georgetown lost at Syracuse 65-63. The headliners tonight, Pat Ewing for Georgetown and Pearl Washington for Syracuse, and both had a roll at the finish. The lead seesawed for most of the second half. With less than 2 minutes to play, Ewing dropped a pair of free throws to put the Hoyas up by 1, 63-62. But Washington won it for Syracuse at the end. Watch the move. Pearl will spin towards the free throw line and drilled this jumper with just 9 seconds to play. Washington hit a free throw 2 seconds later, and that's how it's ended. The Orangemen over Georgetown tonight, 65-63. And there's the team that'll probably move up to #2. #3, Memphis State beat Cincinnati tonight, 81-61. An update tonight on Gopher freshman Mitch Lee. As you may know, Lee was arrested last Friday in connection with an alleged sexual assault on a female student at the university. The case is now in the hands of Assistant Hennepin County Attorney Jim Gaffney. Gaffney is reviewing the case and should decide tomorrow whether or not Lee should be charged. If he is charged, that probably won't happen until Wednesday. In the meantime, Lee is not practicing with the team, and he did not play during last Saturday's loss to Northwestern. Saturday's overtime loss to Colorado College dropped the Gopher hockey team from first place in the Western Collegiate Hockey Association and from 3rd to 5th in the weekly poll out of Hancock, Michigan. There's the poll coming up for you, folks. Michigan State is still at the top. Then it's Boston College, UMD, RPI, and the Gophers. As I said, Minnesota is now in 2nd place in the WCHA, 1 point behind Duluth. The Gophers will be on the road this weekend for a 2-game series at Michigan Tech. The North Stars will not have to play against goaltender Billy Smith when the Stars play the Islanders tomorrow night in New York. Battlin' Billy has long had the reputation for using his stick on opponents, and this time he's going to pay for it. Smith was given a 6-game suspension today for clubbing the Blackhawks' Kurt Frazier back on January 13th. Frazier left the ice with a fractured cheekbone, and he hasn't played since. In the National Hockey League, just one score to let you know about tonight. Calgary beating Edmonton at the moment 2-1 in the first period. A deal today by the Minnesota Strikers. They sent defender Barry Wallace to Wichita in exchange for forward Drago Dumbovic. The Strikers hope the trade will give them additional power up front. Dumbovic has just 3 goals in 12 games this season, and a terrible name, but a year ago he scored 32 goals for Pittsburgh. He's expected to make his Strikers debut Friday night in St. Louis, but we'll cheer for him anyway. Finally, in sports, the beginning of the end for Metropolitan Stadium in Bloomington. The old Met has stood empty since the Twins and the Vikings moved downtown 3 years ago. Demolition of the stadium was inevitable, and that process, well, started this afternoon. The city of Bloomington will be developing the property, but of course for many Minnesotans, the Met will still be there at the corner of Cedar and 494 long after the stadium has been replaced by shopping areas, housing units, and office buildings. The Met had been a fixture at that intersection since the mid-1950s. The stadium first opened in 1956. Professional sports came to the Twin Cities 5 years later, and the Met was home to both the Twins and the Vikings for the better part of 2 decades. Ironically, one of the first sections of the stadium to be completed some 30 years ago was the first to come down this afternoon. The demolition of the Met was a sentimental occasion for some of the men who made their living there. People like Bill Brown, Bob Allison, and Hall of Famer, the great one, Harmon Killebrew.
Well, I think it's going to be a little bit of sadness to see it go, and I think, as I say, the tailgating part of it and everything that went along with it, the fans seemed to get closer and the people got closer. So I think that's a big part of the life around here that's going to be missed.
Does this indeed signal progress?
Oh, I think it does. Regress or progress, whichever way you want to say it.
It's like opening day. The temperature is just about right, to be honest with you. But it's quite a day, and a lot of memories here that we're all going to leave. And one thing about it, they can't take it away from us as human beings. We can always remember them, but it's kind of sad to see the Met go.
We were looking at the scoreboard, and Oliva hit a ball off there, Roger Marison and Reggie Jackson, and to look around here, why, there's a lot of thoughts.
A lot of good thoughts, I'm sure.
A lot of good thoughts, it really is, and sorry to see it go.
Said it's kind of neat how they're doing that at the stadium. I do have some news about one of the teams that really had so many great moments at the Met, the Twins. I talked to Howard Fox, president of the Twins. He told me tonight they've signed 2 more players. They'll be announcing those names tomorrow, so things have changed over at the Minnesota Twins. But sorry, it's sad to see that stadium go, but time moves on.
Were you ever out there on bat day?
Oh, yeah.
Up there in the stands?
It sounded just like that.
I thought that was going to happen when I was sitting up there in the 3rd deck. I really did. All that rhythm, wow, bad.
You guys are just big kids.
We
Let's
are.
face it, you're just overgrown little boys.
Yes.
A good story to end this newscast with tonight. A joyous reunion at Twin Cities International Airport this evening. A brother and sister who have not seen each other for more than 40 years were reunited. And as Kevin Berger reports, war, distance, and time stood between the man and the woman until tonight.
It's a dream come true.
Linda McGraw always wanted aunts and uncles and cousins. Her mother and father are Polish. Her father, Tony Kowalski, escaped from a German concentration camp in World War II before immigrating to the U.S. as a displaced person. The war scattered the family. Tony didn't know what happened to his 12 brothers and sisters. Linda McGraw always felt incomplete because she didn't know her relatives.
When I was a little girl, I used to ask my parents about my family, and they said, forget about it. Nobody's alive. They're all dead. They died in the war. And I used to just sit and think about it, listen to my friends talk about their family, and just wonder what it would be like.
This is the night Linda found out what it would be like. Tonight, her father's sister, Helena, and Helena's daughter arrived at the airport from Poland.
What will you want to ask her when you see her? What will you talk about?
I says, where you been so long? That's what I'm going to ask her.
Oh, they're putting her on. Come here, Pop. Come here. Come on. You know, I want to touch them, you know. I've heard about it for so long, now I want to touch them. I've talked to them. That's established. And it's just the fact of physically touching them right now.
Where you been so long?
The visit will last 3 weeks, plenty of time to get reacquainted. And then Linda McGraw says she wants to go to Poland. Kevin Berger, Channel 5 Eyewitness News at the Twin Cities International Airport.
Oh, that's a nice story.
Once again, our top stories of the day, the perfect budget message, cold weather coming ahead, and maybe some snow. We will give you further details on that on the morning news. Please join us then.
And don't forget Draco Dumbovich, too. He was in Bob's Sportscast tonight.
There you go.
You got that one, Bob?
Name of the week.
Work on that overnight, will you?
We'll see you tomorrow. Good night.
Good night.
KSTP-TV, St. Paul, Minneapolis, Channel 5.
Good evening. I'm Ted Koppel, and this is Nightline.
If only the Allies knew, we said to one another. If only Roosevelt knew. If only Churchill knew. If only the Pope knew, the killer wouldn't kill.
There is compelling, even overwhelming evidence that they did know, but that they did too little and much too late. That's our story tonight.
This is ABC News Nightline. Reporting from Washington, Ted Koppel.
The Holocaust? No, there has been nothing to match the scope of its brutality during the past 40 years. But considering how little attention we paid to the 3 million who died in Cambodia, to the slaughtered Igbo in Nigeria, to the war victims in Iran and Iraq and Afghanistan, and considering how long it took us to become even moderately interested in Ethiopia's famine, we should perhaps reserve judgment on those who failed to act or those who acted much too late to help the victims of the Holocaust during the early 1940s. It is not, as you will hear, that what they did was right, but that we, in so many ways, are still like them. Nightline correspondent Jed Duval spoke with the author of a new and extraordinary book. It is called The Abandonment of the Jews. The author is history professor David Wyman.
By the dozens, by the hundreds, by the thousands, by the millions, they were marched to their deaths. The systematic murder of a people. David S. Wyman, a professor of history at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, says the United States knew about it, could have acted, and did not.
The State Department was not interested in, they did not want to get involved in rescue. The State Department did not want pressure to bring Jews in here. One, because they didn't like Jews, they didn't like any Eastern Europeans. They were quite aware, and everything I've seen in the research indicates they were correct in this assessment, that if they took in even the full quotas, 60,000 a year, there would have been hell raised in Congress.
The Congress was not inclined to large-scale immigration, and to the extent that there was anti-Semitism in the Congress, it represented the country.
We do have opinion polling, and it indicates high levels of anti-Semitism, probably the peak level in American history during the end of the 30s and into the war years. Those polls show that American people considered Jews more of a danger than Germans and Japanese, except for the 1 year of 42, when the beginning of the war was freshest in people's minds.
President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, according to Wyman, failed on this issue, knew and turned away. Roosevelt and those in his administration knew by late 1942 that hundreds of thousands of Jews were being killed in organized fashion. 5 American Jewish leaders came to see the president.
As the Jewish leaders came in and handed him a document summarizing the information they had. He said, I know this, and I know it's as bad as or worse than what you think.
One of the 5 Jewish leaders at the meeting with President Roosevelt was Adolf Held of the Jewish Labor Committee. His were the only authoritative notes of the session. They are preserved in the Labor Committee's archives.
So there's an absolute point beyond which we're sure that Roosevelt was aware. He did not act. He was indifferent in response to it.
In October of 1943, several hundred Orthodox rabbis came to Washington to try to make their plea for Europe's Jews directly to Roosevelt. They were told the president was too busy.
I've seen his agenda for that day. It's available in the archives. He had a little business in the morning, the afternoon, which was when they planned to see him, 4 o'clock, wide open. And he left the White House about a half hour before these rabbis were to arrive.
The rabbis held their own march, and it was reported in a few newspapers, mostly on inside pages. Indeed, inside is where newspapers of the day, including the leading papers, put news of the assembly line deaths. Only rarely was it front-page news, even in Jewish-owned newspapers such as the New York Times and Washington Post. The American Jewish community was divided. A few leaders were active. Many others were inert, afraid of the issue as politically sensitive, unwilling to press. David Wyman found out all these things about the news media, about the government and Jewish leaders. But for him, the most terrible discovery was what the churches did not do.
From the Christian churches, a thunderous silence. No denomination, Protestant or Catholic, took a clear statement, made a statement on this issue and said, this is wrong, this must stop. We must do whatever possible. So we hear about the failure of the Pope to speak out about it. It was not only the Pope. In our country, the leadership of the churches didn't take up the issue.
David Wyman is the grandson of 2 ministers.
That's what hurt me most as a Christian, and as a Christian who grew up in a Methodist church in that period, to find out that my own people, those who were in the liberal cutting edge of social-oriented Christianity in this country failed, and they failed badly on the issue. They had an important role to play in it, and they failed. When I wrote the chapter that began to deal with that, when I get into that in the 4th chapter, that for the first time, I think since I was an adult, I cried. It was to me, to be a male adult meant you did not cry. It was weakness. I learned, the one thing I learned from this book, you must cry. There are times that people must cry, and that's what taught me that. I was very disturbed. I can remember sitting right there and writing that paragraph, and I saw it. And then when I saw what I was written, I just stopped.
When the rabbis who had come to Washington failed to see the president, when they had asked America for help and America turned away, the rabbis went to the Lincoln Memorial. They formed a group there and sang in Hebrew. They sang the Star-Spangled Banner. Jed Duval for Nightline from Washington.
Later in this broadcast, we'll hear from Elie Wiesel, poet, philosopher, and Auschwitz survivor who this weekend returned to Auschwitz for the anniversary of its liberation 40 years ago. We'll also talk with an American who did help during World War II, John Paley, who served as executive director of the War Refugee Board. But first, when we return, we'll talk with the author of the book, The Abandonment of the Jews, Professor David Wyman of the University of Massachusetts.
This is ABC News Nightline, brought to you by RCA.
Who has taken complete control and placed it at your fingertips? RCA, with an amazing VCR that asks you what you want to record and when, in simple language, right on the screen of your TV. So what you select on screen with this advanced remote control, you'll get on videotape. The world's first remote programmable VCR, only from RCA, technology that excites the senses.
To the 140 million check writers in this country,
Here's my check.
take note of this sign. When you see it any place, anywhere in the country or the world, Telecheck says your check is welcome.
I have a check. And this out-of-state license?
No card to carry, nothing to join. Just look for the red and white Telecheck sign. A sign for all 140 million of you. Your first check.
Yeah. Is it okay?
Make that 140 million and one. Telecheck says your check is welcome.
You run this whole department.
With the help of a few other people.
He was class president.
He always thought big.
Yeah.
A personal computer.
Actually, it's more than that, Dad. It's a tower.
Tower?
An NCR tower. It's faster and more powerful than a personal computer, and all my people can hook up to it.
Smart. Like his father.
And like his mother.
The NCR tower, when you need more than a personal computer.
I'll never vacuum my bedroom again. I'll never vacuum my dining room again.
From now on, I'll electric broom with the 3-speed Regina electric broom. It's easier to electric broom.
Lighter and faster. And my floors look beautiful.
From now on, I'll electric broom.
It saves me time for the things I really enjoy.
Don't vacuum, electric broom. There's a choice of 3 Regina electric brooms, and now the 2-motor electric broom power team.
I'm Peter Jennings. Tomorrow on ABC's World News Tonight, dramatic new hope for people who have herpes. An over-the-counter pill, and the experts say it could stop the spread of the disease altogether.
It was an extraordinary event. People from throughout the world gathered at Auschwitz, Poland this weekend to commemorate the 40th anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz death camp. A camp where in a space of 5.5 years, some 4 million men, women, and children were systematically put to death. It is ironic in a sense that 40 years later, what happened at Auschwitz is receiving more attention in the outside world than it did at the time the murders were taking place. Joining us now live in our New York studios, David Wyman, professor of history at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. His book, The Abandonment of the Jews, documents that seeming indifference. Professor Wyman, let me try to postulate a reason for that indifference. There was a terrible war going on. There had to be other, even greater considerations to those who were running the war effort, who were concerned about the armies, who were concerned about, quite literally, the fate of mankind overall. Does that in any way explain to you what now seems like callousness and indifference?
No, not really, because of course, that was the overwhelming issue at the time, was the war, but there was room for other issues to be dealt with during the time. Let me throw simply one point in there. The United States and the British were willing and able to move 100,000 non-Jewish Greeks, Poles, and Yugoslavs who were in some danger out of Europe and move them across the Mediterranean and set up camps for them and care for them in North Africa. All the problems that seemed to come to the forefront when the issue was getting Jews out evaporated in the face of that kind of effort.
And to what do you primarily attribute that? We have heard mentioned anti-Semitism, at least in the mid-levels of the State Department, a real factor?
Anti-Semitism was certainly a factor within the State Department, but more importantly in Congress and in the society as a whole. The State Department was not interested in bringing Jewish refugees into this country because of their own personal feelings, in part, but I think much deeper than that was their concern that if they had moved, and probably this was in part Roosevelt's concern, part of the reason that he hesitated to move, that Congress would respond in a very negative way.
You suggest in your book that President Roosevelt had a rather cynical attitude, politically speaking, that in a sense he took the Jewish vote for granted and didn't want to alienate the non-Jewish vote. How much of a factor do you think that was?
Well, it was a factor certainly in Roosevelt's response, because we find that he did move in January 1944, 14 months, by the way, after the information had become available. There was that terrible loss of 14 months of opportunity to do what might be done before Roosevelt and the American government did move. But he did move in that situation, which would indicate that he was responsive to the pressures when they could be put upon him.
When we see, as we just did, those tiny little boxes on the inside page when Rabbi Stephen Wise came to Washington, got confirmation of what his worst fears were, held a news conference, told newsmen that at least 2 million people had already died in the camps, and there it is, relegated to a little box on page 11, I think it was, of the New York Times, and I don't remember what page it was of the Washington Post. Why?
That remains an enigma. Whether there was a fear that this was too sensationalistic and it might be found to be inaccurate, I don't know. But that doesn't hold up, because after the first reports, more reports came, even more horrible reports, and the evidence accumulated massively in early 1943. So there couldn't really have been any doubt about it. I never really have come to a final answer as to why that was lost in the papers in that fashion.
And perhaps the greatest enigma of all, why do you think it was that the American Jewish community was not able to get together on this and speak with one voice?
Because there are many differences in the American Jewish community, as there are among any groups of people. It was very hard to pull together. It was an urgent situation, but somehow or other the divisiveness continued to be there. Let me say, nonetheless, though, that it was the American Jewish community that did most of what was done in this country to deal with that issue. That most of the rest of the country failed utterly. The American Jews at least rose significantly to the occasion. They could have done more. We did ultimately establish a war refugee board in 1944 in January, and there were some achievements made through that war refugee board.
We're going to talk about precisely that in just a moment, because when we come back, we'll be joined by John Paley, who served as executive director of the War Refugee Board, the organization that was finally created by President Roosevelt in 1944 to try to rescue those slated for death by the Nazis.
At some places that sell computer equipment is all you get. But Entree Computer Centers give you something extra. People who are with you every step of the way. Entree consultants and software experts who make sure you get what's best for your business. Entree instructors, installers, technicians. At Entree, you get more than leading brands of equipment and software. You get people who help you get the most out of it for as long as you own it. At Entree Computer Centers, we're with you every step of the way.
The same size families are building the same size homes, but they're not making the same choices about the electricity they'll use.
Let's get the efficient one. Let's get the green one.
And making better electric choices in the beginning makes electricity an even better value in the end. Now both families are thrilled to be living in brand new homes. But for one of them, it's a cheaper thrill. Electricity. It's the power of choice.
I'd like to teach the world to sing in perfect harmony. I'd like to buy the world a coat and keep it company. That's the song I sing. I'd like to teach the world to sing in perfect harmony. I'd like to buy the world a coat.
It's coming, beginning as early as 1986. It's called DBS. It will open up a new world of television viewing in America because direct broadcast satellite will be broadcast to all Americans. For about $300 or the price of a small rooftop dish antenna, you will be able to have high-powered DBS in your home. 32 channels of free and subscription television direct from space to you, with the best picture and sound possible at the best possible price. You're about to be faced with a number of television viewing choices. Remember, DBS is coming. Now, the live moment captured by Newstar 5, only on Channel 5's Eyewitness News.
Right, let's go live now to Motley.
Stan Turner is live from San Francisco.
Is in Sioux
Standing
Falls,
by now in Jordan, Minnesota.
Newstar 5 is at the scene of...
Newstar 5 is the new frontier in television news. With Newstar 5 satellite technology, Eyewitness News can be live from any place in the nation at any time. Newstar 5 is only on Channel 5 Eyewitness News, Minnesota's leading news station.
Joining us now live from our Washington Bureau, John Paley, who was executive director of the U.S. War Refugee Board, formed in January of 1944. The board is credited with playing a crucial role in saving the lives of some 200,000 European Jews. But one has to ask, Mr. Paley, why did it take so long? Why was it only formed in January of 1944?
Well, I'd say largely because the public didn't seem to be ready for it. The State Department actually suppressed information coming to the United States about the Holocaust, and there was a good deal of anti-Semitism involved.
Even after the War Refugee Board was created, and after it had, as I recall, a presidential dictum that instructed the other parts of government, the War Department, the State Department, OSS, to cooperate, they did not fully cooperate, did they?
I would say that from the time the War Refugee Board was created by President Roosevelt's executive order, we did get cooperation.
Full cooperation?
Well, I wouldn't say that. The problem was so vast and so difficult to deal with in the midst of a war that there were times when we had trouble. But we had a mandate. We had the right under the executive order to have our own representatives abroad. We had representatives in London. We had representatives in Spain and Turkey and Sweden. And we were able to assist the private agencies in rescue.
Professor Wyman, from having read your book over the past couple of days, you find considerable evidence that the cooperation was not all that forthcoming at times.
That's my position. The executive order was very clear in indicating that all agencies of government were to assist the War Refugee Board to whatever extent needed, as long as it didn't interfere with the war effort. Now, in one immediate case that comes to mind is the request for bombing the gas chambers in Auschwitz and the rail lines leading to Auschwitz. The War Refugee Board made requests to the War Department that that be carefully considered. And what happened was that the War Department simply applied a policy, an internal policy, that they would not involve themselves in rescue. That policy they had initiated shortly after the War Refugee Board was formed. In other words, in defiance of the executive order, the War Department internally made a decision that they would not participate in rescue. That they violated the whole approach. And so when, some months later, the request came into the War Department to consider the bombing of those lines in the gas chambers, they simply went into their files, pulled out a policy which said, we don't cooperate in rescue, and turned around and gave the answer, no, this is impossible to do because it will divert air power that's essential for important targets elsewhere.
You know, that was one of those arguments, Mr. Paley, that one hears again and again and again, and if you put yourself back into the psychology of the closing months of the Second World War, there is a sense of reality that comes through when you hear people say we mustn't do anything that's going to divert from the war effort, because ultimately by defeating the Axis powers, that is the best thing we can do. Was that sometimes used as an excuse?
Well, in the case of the bombing, we finally did ask the War Department to bomb Auschwitz. We were told by the War Department that this would involve bombers going from England, and that fighter escorts couldn't go that distance.
Could I interject there that the bombers that were going right up there at that time were coming from Italy?
That is correct.
Yeah, English-based bombers were irrelevant.
Mr. Wyman is entirely correct. We never learned until after the war that they were bombing all around Auschwitz.
That document that Mr. Paley refers to, I've analyzed very carefully in the book, and it's fraudulent. The reasons given for not being able to do it are false.
That is correct.
And why, how do you, I mean, Mr. Paley, these men and women were your colleagues. How do you explain that? What was the rationale then? If indeed there were planes that had the range, and as I recall Mr. Wyman's book, during precisely the period, I think it was in August, Professor Wyman, was it not, of 1943?
44.
44, rather. During precisely that period, there were bombing raids that were being carried out within 20 or 30 miles of Auschwitz.
Well, Auschwitz itself was struck on August 20th, the industrial facilities there.
I can't explain that, Ted. I suppose the War Department felt that its job was to run the war, and it didn't want to take on any other duties.
That's exactly right. Their own minutes show that.
Yes.
You're quite correct on that.
Mr. Paley, let me ask you another question.
But let me underscore that that's in violation of the executive order, which carries the force of law, when they made that decision that they were to fight a war and not assist in rescue. Is that correct?
It said consistent with the war effort. And I think if somebody asked the War Department to have a raid from the ocean onto the land to rescue people, they could justifiably say this was interfering with the war effort.
Correct, but if they had taken the trouble to check...
But bombing Auschwitz was not in that category.
Right. Let me just get another question into Mr. Paley, Professor Wyman. During the time that the War Refugee Board was in effect, how many Jewish refugees did you succeed in bringing to the United States?
1,000. And that was with great difficulty. We felt it was necessary that we bring some people here outside the quota, because we were asking other countries to do this. And finally, we brought in 1,000 people at Camp Oswego in northern New York.
Wasn't that ultimately, wouldn't you say, that was one of the factors that caused many of our allies to be able to say, look, you guys aren't doing it, why should we? Wasn't that ultimately used as a justification?
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure.
Why was it so few? Why weren't you able to get more?
Professor Wyman is correct that Congress was very opposed to immigration. Labor didn't want additional people brought in. There was a great deal of anti-Semitism. The mood of the country was not at all as it is now.
Could I point out that when that 1,000 was brought in, outside the quota, the U.S. quotas, immigration quotas, which would have permitted the entry of 60,000 refugees per year, were being used to the extent of only 10%. 6,000 came in that year, and yet they had to make a special arrangement to bring 1,000 in around the quota, indicative of the State Department's unwillingness to cooperate in the whole procedure.
All right, gentlemen,
the people in the War Refugee Board had to go to extreme lengths to get the president to allow that 1,000 to come in.
That's Professor Wyman, excuse me, I thank you so much for joining us, and Mr. Paley, I'm most appreciative that you came in. When we come back, tonight's Insider segment, we'll hear from poet and philosopher Elie Wiesel, a death camp survivor who this past weekend returned to Auschwitz on the 40th anniversary of its liberation.
Jerry, you bounced a $42 check. I've got $6 grand sitting in savings.
We're sorry, the bank is closed. Please call tomorrow between them.
Isn't it time you took back control? The Citibank financial account includes no bounce checking, 24-hour access, and one consolidated statement. So once again, you're in control.
So you'll transfer $800 to my checking. Great. Have a nice day. Good night.
The Citibank financial account. The most bank for your money.
You probably can't guess where you can find all this under one roof. Probably not at the stereo store at the mall. Probably not at the TV shop. Or the computer center across town. You'll find all this at Sears. That's right, Sears.
There's more for your life at Sears.
Hello, Kraft Company? About your macaroni and cheese. Tell 'em, Annie. We think it should be called Kraft Cheese and Macaroni, because it tastes the cheesiest. What'd they say? They'd have to change a million boxes.
Kraft Macaroni and Cheese has more cheese than any other brand. That's why it tastes the best.
There's one. A million boxes? I think we're gonna need more crayons.
Kraft Cheese and Macaroni, the cheesiest.
KSTP, Eyewitness News.
It takes a specialist to make sense out of Minnesota's weather. Meteorologist Dennis Felkin makes sense.
This is the only weather department in town with only meteorologists on its staff. And let me tell you why that's important. A meteorologist knows why something is happening and can better forecast what's going to happen.
Dennis Felkin.
Eyewitness News.
Please join us for the next edition of Eyewitness News at 5.
We'll have the latest news, weather, and sports, and Dr. Michael Breen on your health.
That's next on Eyewitness News at 5.
I'm Joan London. How can you save money, and if you have it, where should you invest it? We'll find out tomorrow morning. Plus, Burt Reynolds talks about Clint Eastwood tomorrow on Good Morning America.
Elie Wiesel was 14 years old when he entered Auschwitz concentration camp with his family in 1944. He survived the Holocaust. His mother, his father, and his younger sister did not. This past weekend, Elie Wiesel returned to Auschwitz accompanied by ABC News correspondent Peter Jennings for ceremonies marking the 40th anniversary of the liberation of the camp. During the course of their visit, Wiesel read for us a poem about Auschwitz that he wrote in 1979.
Listen to the wind. Listen to the wind, for there is nothing else you can listen to. For this was the place where children became old and where old men had no children to console, and they all died. Listen to the stones. For the stones themselves were broken as our hearts were broken. For this is the place of eternal night. In this place, people were abandoned, doomed. Mothers, children, grandparents, brothers, sisters. Imagine 4 million people lived and vanished overnight in this place. A whole nation could be built with 4 million people. There could be enough doctors, enough teachers, enough parents, enough children, enough princes, enough kings, enough merchants, enough dreamers, enough teachers to build a people. This is no cemetery. Those men and women and children, those old Jews, those Jewish children, those rabbis and their disciples, the singers of songs, the dreamers of dreams, they perished here and they have no cemetery. They don't even have a cemetery. We are their cemetery.
That's our report for tonight. Good night.